My son turned 7 on a Saturday in October. The house smelled like frosting and balloons, and for exactly 43 minutes, everything was perfect. Then my sister Lauren picked up the first gift, a remote control car my husband Will had driven 3 towns over to find, looked me dead in the eye, and dropped it on the hardwood floor. Not by accident. She held it over the edge of the table with 2 fingers, like she was dangling a spider over a drain, watched me register what was about to happen, and then she let go. The plastic cracked clean in half. And my family, my mother, my aunt, my cousins, they laughed. My son Sean looked up at me with those big brown eyes, lower lip trembling, and I smiled at him because that's what mothers do. We smile through the fire. But what happened in the next 3 weeks, what my father did with his wedding ring, what a single manila envelope quietly delivered to a courthouse in downtown Boston ended up doing to Lauren's entire carefully constructed life. Stay with me, because this is not a story about shouting or crying or dramatic confrontations at the dinner table. This is a story about paperwork, about patience, about the kind of quiet, cold justice that people like Lauren never see coming, because they've spent their whole lives assuming people like me will simply take it. I am Kelly. I am 36 years old. I live in Boston, and I am done taking it. If you've ever sat in a room full of people who were supposed to love you and felt completely invisible, completely outnumbered, completely alone, please subscribe. Your support means everything, and it reminds me I'm not alone in this. Let me paint you a picture of the family I grew up in, because nothing that happened at that birthday party makes sense without it. My parents, my father Doyle and my mother Barbara, got married young. Doyle was 22, Barbara was 19. They had Lauren first, and then 3 years later they had me. Lauren was the one who inherited Barbara's sharp green eyes and her sharper tongue. I got my father's quiet nature and his tendency to observe before speaking. In a loud family, that made me invisible, which I would learn much later was exactly the way certain people preferred it. Growing up, Lauren was electric. She was the kind of girl who walked into a room and rearranged it without touching a single piece of furniture. Just by existing, just by speaking. Teachers adored her, neighbors adored her. Our extended family, the aunts and cousins who showed up at holidays and filled our small house with noise and casserole dishes, adored her most of all. And me? I was Kelly, the quiet one, the reliable one. The one who did the dishes without being asked, who remembered everyone's birthdays, who sat at the kids' table until I was 22, because no one thought to move me up. I don't say this for sympathy. I say it because you need to understand the ecosystem I existed in, and the role I had been assigned in it before I was old enough to have any say in the matter. Lauren's role was golden child, mine was background character. And for a very long time I played my part so well that I almost believed it myself. I met my husband Will when I was 27, at a work event in Cambridge. He was there representing an architecture firm. I was there representing a nonprofit I'd been working at for 4 years. He was tall, broad-shouldered, had these reading glasses he kept pushing up his nose every time he looked down at his phone, and he laughed at something I said in a way that made me feel like I'd said the wittiest thing in the room. No one had ever made me feel like that before. We dated for 2 years, got married in a small ceremony with 30 guests, a decision my mother made sure everyone knew she considered an insult. And we moved into a rental in Jamaica Plain while we saved for something more permanent. When Sean was born 3 years later, I felt, maybe for the first time in my adult life, like I had built something completely mine, something no one could reassign or diminish or hand over to Lauren. Sean was ours, our little world, and it was good. What I didn't fully account for was Lauren's relationship with anything that made me happy. Lauren had married a man named Brian 2 years before Will and I got together. Brian was decent enough, quiet in the way people are quiet when they've been worn down, not in the way my father was quiet, which was thoughtful and deliberate. Brian worked in insurance, made good money, and seemed to have accepted that his primary role in the marriage was to fund Lauren's lifestyle and absorb her moods. They had no children. This was not, as far as I knew, by choice on Lauren's part. And I truly believe, that when Sean was born, something inside Lauren shifted in a direction that was never going to end well for anyone. But I didn't see it then. I was too busy being happy. Sean's 7th birthday fell on a Saturday, which meant Will and I had agreed to host an afternoon party at our house in Dorchester. We'd bought it 2 years earlier, a 3-bedroom colonial that we'd spent every weekend for a year slowly making ours. We'd repainted the living room twice. We'd refinished the floors ourselves. We'd planted a garden in the backyard that produced approximately 11 tomatoes, but felt like an enormous personal victory. It was our home. We were proud of it. The guest list was a mix of Sean's school friends, a few of Will's colleagues who had kids the same age, and family. My family specifically, Will's parents lived in Phoenix and weren't able to make the trip. So it was Barbara and Doyle, Lauren and Brian, my Aunt Miranda, Barbara's sister, my cousin Olivia, and Olivia's husband Tariq. I had spent 2 weeks preparing. I baked the cake myself, a chocolate layer cake with orange frosting, because Sean was going through an intense Halloween phase and had requested it specifically. Will had wrapped the gifts with this hilarious, overly elaborate ribbon situation that made Sean laugh until he hiccuped. We'd blown up probably 40 balloons. We had a playlist, we had games planned, we had little party favor bags tied with orange ribbon. It was exactly the kind of birthday I had wished someone would throw for me as a kid, and no one ever did. For 43 minutes, I know it was 43 because I checked the time when the first guests arrived and checked it again when everything fell apart. It was perfect. Sean was spinning around in the middle of the living room, overwhelmed and joyful, already ripping the ribbon off the first gift. His school friends, including his best friend Alex and a boy named Johnny, who apparently talked about dinosaurs exclusively, were loud and happy and running. Will was in the kitchen cutting the cake. Doyle was sitting in the armchair by the window, watching Sean with this expression on his face, soft, warm, proud, that I took a mental photograph of because I wanted to remember it. Then Lauren stood up. She had been sitting on the couch next to Brian, who was nursing a soda and scrolling his phone. She stood up, smoothed her dress, picked up the remote control car that Will had wrapped and placed at the top of the gift pile, and she dangled it over the edge of the table. I watched her. Our eyes met. And she dropped it. The crack was loud enough that 3 conversations stopped. Sean looked at the pieces, then up at his aunt, then at me. "Whoops," Lauren said, and she smiled. And my family laughed. Not all of them. Doyle didn't laugh. He went very still in his armchair, the way he sometimes went still when something had crossed a line so profound it required a moment to fully process. Will, who had come out of the kitchen at the sound of the crack, stood in the doorway with a look on his face that I recognized as the look he got when he was deciding whether to say something or wait. But Barbara laughed, Miranda laughed, Olivia laughed, though she stopped faster than the others and looked at Tariq, who was not laughing at all. Brian looked at his phone. I turned to Sean and I said, "Hey buddy, look, here's another one, come on." And I physically redirected his attention to the next gift in the pile, because he was 7 years old, and none of what was happening in that room was his fault or his problem to carry. But my hands were shaking. Lauren sat back down on the couch, satisfied, and that was how I knew this had not been impulsive. This had been chosen. The party continued. Children are merciful in their ability to simply move forward, and Sean moved forward. He opened the rest of his gifts with enthusiasm. He ate 2 slices of cake. He ran around the backyard with Alex and Johnny until they were all red-faced and breathless. But the adults did not move forward. Not really. Lauren, emboldened by the laugh she'd gotten, spent the rest of the afternoon making a series of small, targeted comments about the house. "It's cozy," said in the exact tone of voice that meant the opposite. About the cake. "Homemade, how ambitious." About Will's gift wrapping, "Someone had a lot of free time." About my neighborhood, "I always forget how far out you are." Each one landed like a pebble, small enough to dismiss, frequent enough to bruise. Will caught my eye twice. I shook my head both times. Not here, not today, not in front of Sean. When the guests left, Will helped me clean up in near silence. Sean fell asleep on the couch clutching a stuffed robot he'd gotten from Alex, still wearing his birthday crown, orange frosting dried on his upper lip. I stood in my kitchen looking at the broken remote control car on the counter. Will had gathered both pieces and put them there, like evidence, and I felt something settle in me. Not anger, exactly. Something colder, something more useful. "Talk to me," Will said. I looked at my husband, this patient, good man who had driven 3 towns over for a toy for our son, and I said, "I need you to not talk me out of what I'm about to decide." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Okay." That was the moment it began. Here is something about living in the background your entire life. You get very good at paying attention to things people assume you're not paying attention to. I had, over the years, accumulated a great deal of information about Lauren's life that Lauren would have been horrified to know I possessed. Not through snooping, simply through observation, through being underestimated, through being the person no one thought to lower their voice around. I knew, for instance, that Lauren and Brian's marriage had been in serious trouble for at least 2 years. I knew this because Brian had, at a family Christmas dinner 18 months prior, had 3 glasses of wine and quietly told my father that he didn't know how much longer he could do this, and my father had responded in that measured way he had, and neither of them had noticed I was sitting 4 feet away loading the dishwasher. I knew that Lauren had been spending money in ways that Brian was not aware of. I knew this because my mother, who had a habit of sharing information she should have kept to herself when she wanted to appear knowledgeable, had once mentioned that Lauren had opened a credit card just for herself, and that Barbara had thought this was quite sensible and modern. I knew that Lauren had been having what I can only describe as an emotionally complicated relationship with a man named Mike, a colleague of hers from the marketing firm where she worked, because Olivia had mentioned it to Tariq at a family cookout the previous summer, in a low voice while standing on our back porch, not knowing I was sitting in the dark on the porch swing 12 feet away. None of this was information I had sought. All of it was information I had passively received because I was the piece of furniture in the room, the background character. But on the night of Sean's birthday, sitting at my kitchen table with a legal pad in front of me, I started thinking about what I actually knew, and I started thinking about who, specifically, might find it useful. And I thought about my father. Doyle had not laughed. 2 days after the birthday party, my father called me. This was unusual. Doyle was not a phone call person. He was a show up at your door with a bag of groceries person, a leave a voicemail that said only, "It's Dad, call me when you can" person. An actual phone call from Doyle meant something. I answered on the second ring. "How's Sean?" he said. "He's good," I said. He bounced back fast. "You know how he is." "Good," Doyle said. And then he was quiet for a moment in that way of his, that processing quiet, and he said, "I want you to know I didn't think it was funny." Something tightened in my throat. "I know, Dad." I should have said something in the moment. "It's okay." "It's not," he said, simply, flatly, like a fact. We talked for a while, about Sean, about Will's new project at work, about a book my father had been reading. He never mentioned Lauren by name again during that call. But when we were hanging up, he said, "Your mother and I are going to have some conversations. I don't want you to be surprised by what comes of them." I didn't know what that meant yet. I would find out. Tariq is one of those people who operates at a frequency of fundamental decency that is almost disorienting in certain family contexts. He is a large man, quiet in social situations, with this quality of stillness that I recognized in my father, that observational patience. He and Olivia had been married for 6 years, and in that time I had come to trust Tariq in a way I struggled to trust most people connected to my family. He called me on a Wednesday, 4 days after the party. "Olivia doesn't know I'm calling," he said first. "Okay," I said. "She felt bad about laughing. She wants you to know that. But she's in a complicated position with your mother and she doesn't want to make things worse." I understand. I don't understand it, Tariq said, but I understand that she does. What I'm calling about is something else. He paused. Do you know a man named Mike Ramirez? My pulse shifted slightly. I've heard the name. He works with Lauren at Callaway Marketing. Okay. He called Brian last week, before the party. He called Brian directly and he told Brian about him and Lauren, the whole thing. Timeline, details, the works. Another pause. I don't know why he did it. Maybe Lauren ended it and he didn't take it well. Maybe he had his own reasons. But Brian knows. I sat with that. Brian was at the party, I said. Brian was at the party, Tariq confirmed, sitting on that couch. He knows everything, and Lauren doesn't know he knows. He's been deciding what to do. I thought about Brian sitting on that couch scrolling his phone while Lauren dropped my son's birthday gift on the floor and laughed. Thank you for telling me, I said. Kelly, Tariq said, I've watched how your family treats you for 6 years. I just thought you deserved to have the full picture. I need to pause for just a second, because I know some of you are watching this from a place where you've lived some version of this, where the people who were supposed to protect you chose someone else, where you've been the one holding it together while someone else got all the grace. If that's you, you are not invisible here. Please subscribe. Your support means everything, and it reminds me I'm not alone in this. And don't you dare click away now, because what my father did next, what he said with just 4 words, is about to change the entire shape of this story. 3 weeks after the birthday party, my mother called and asked me to come to Sunday dinner. Just me, not Will, not Sean. Family conversation, she said, in a tone that suggested this was perfectly normal and not at all alarming. I drove to my parents' house in Brookline on a gray November Sunday, and when I walked in, Lauren was already there. She was sitting at the kitchen table looking composed and slightly bored. Brian was not with her. When I asked where he was, she said, home, in a way that closed the door on the subject. My father was standing by the kitchen window with a cup of coffee going cold in his hand. He looked tired in a way that went deeper than sleep. My mother started the meeting, and it was a meeting, despite the pot roast on the table. She had clearly prepared remarks. The gist of them was this, that there had been tension in the family, that we were all adults, that we needed to find a way to move forward, that what happened at the party had been a misunderstanding, that Lauren hadn't meant it the way it came across, and that Kelly, the background character, needed to be more generous in how I interpreted things. I let her finish. Then I said, very calmly, Lauren dropped my son's birthday gift on purpose, directly after making eye contact with me. That is not a misunderstanding. That is a choice. Lauren said, here we go. And my mother said, Kelly, you've always been sensitive. And that was when my father set his coffee cup down on the counter. The sound of it, that small ceramic click, stopped the room. Doyle turned around slowly. He looked at my mother, then at Lauren, then at me. And then he reached up with his right hand, took hold of his wedding ring, and slid it off his finger. He set it on the counter next to the coffee cup. The room went absolutely silent. And my father looked at my mother and said, I am done with this. 4 words. That was all. My mother's face went the color of copy paper. Lauren's composure cracked so fast I saw the exact moment it happened, a flinch around her eyes, a slight parting of her lips. My father looked at me then, not with anger, with something so much sadder and more solid than anger, with the quiet devastation of a man who has watched something happen for 30 years, and finally, on a gray November Sunday, decided he had watched long enough. He said, I'm sorry, Kelly. I should have said something a long time before now. And then he picked up his jacket from the hook by the door and he walked out. What I learned in the weeks that followed is that my father's 4 words were not impulsive. They were the surface of something that had been building for years, maybe decades. And what happened at Sean's birthday party had simply been the moment it broke the surface. Doyle moved into a furnished apartment in Newton. He retained a lawyer, a woman named Holly, who came highly recommended by a colleague of Will's. He began the process of formally separating from my mother after 39 years of marriage. My mother blamed me entirely for this. This surprised exactly no one who had been paying attention. She called me 7 times in the first week. I answered twice. Both conversations ended the same way, with Barbara cycling through grief to anger to guilt assignment, landing always on the same conclusion, that Kelly had done something, said something, caused something. That if I had simply been more gracious, more forgiving, less sensitive, none of this would have happened. I did not argue with her. There is no argument to win when the other person's entire emotional infrastructure requires you to be the problem. I simply said, each time, I didn't remove that ring, Mom, Dad did. Lauren, meanwhile, had her own catastrophe to manage. Brian had filed for divorce. Not quietly, not gently, not with a kind of mutual agreement that lets both parties walk away with their dignity. Brian, quiet, worn down, phone-scrolling Brian, had filed with a lawyer named Lance who specialized in high-asset divorces, and he had filed with documentation. The kind of documentation that comes from knowing exactly what you're looking for, because someone told you specifically where to look. I don't know, to this day, whether Brian's lawyer and my father's lawyer had ever spoken. I don't know whether Holly and Lance had a coffee and a conversation somewhere in downtown Boston that I was never told about. I don't know if Doyle, in that deliberate and methodical way of his, had made a phone call or two in the 3 weeks between Sean's birthday and that Sunday dinner. What I do know is that Lauren's carefully constructed life, the marketing career, the joint accounts, the house in Newton that she had chosen specifically because it was nicer than mine, began to come apart at every seam at approximately the same time. And I had not made a single phone call. I had not sent a single email. I had not done anything except sit in my own kitchen on the night of my son's birthday and decide, quietly, that I was done being the background character. Will's colleague who had recommended Holly described her as thorough. This turned out to be a considerable understatement. My father had retained Holly to handle the separation, but in the course of that process, Holly had apparently discovered several things about the household finances that Doyle had not been fully aware of. Because Doyle, like Will, was someone who trusted the people he loved, and like Will, he had not imagined he was living in an environment where that trust was being exploited. My mother, it turned out, had over the course of several years been transferring modest amounts from joint accounts into a personal account that Doyle knew existed, but had assumed was dormant. The amounts were small enough to avoid triggering any automatic concern. Accumulated over time, they were not small at all. My mother had also, on 2 separate occasions, co-signed documents for Lauren, financial documents, the specifics of which I was not privy to, but which Holly apparently found relevant to the separation proceedings. I am not a lawyer. I don't fully understand everything that Holly discovered, or everything that it meant. What I understand is what my father told me when we had dinner together one Thursday evening at a small Italian place near his apartment in Newton. Just the 2 of us. First time in my adult life I could remember it being just the 2 of us, and what he told me was this. Your mother has been taking care of Lauren for years in ways that neither of them told me about. I paid for Lauren's lifestyle for a long time without knowing I was doing it. Holly is going to make sure the settlement reflects that. I looked at my father across that small table, this quiet man who had been sidelined in his own house almost as completely as I had been sidelined in that family story, and I felt something I hadn't expected. Grief. Not satisfaction. Not vindication. Grief for all the time and all the dinners and all the Sunday afternoons that had been arranged around a lie. I'm sorry, Dad, I said. He shook his head. Don't be sorry for me. I made choices. I let things go on too long because it was easier than the alternative. He was quiet for a moment. I watched what happened at that birthday party and I thought, if I let that go, what does that say to Sean? What does that say to you? He picked up his fork. I'm 64 years old. I still have time to say the right thing. My cousin Olivia called me in December, she cried, which is not something Olivia does easily or often. She said she was sorry. For laughing, for not saying anything, for all the years of watching and saying nothing because it was easier. I told her I didn't blame her, and I didn't, not really. There is something almost environmental about family dynamics at a certain scale. You breathe in the rules of the system you're born into before you're old enough to question whether they're rules worth keeping. Olivia had breathed in the same air I had. She just ended up on the side of the table with the laughers instead of the side with the one being laughed at. Tariq never laughed, she said. Not once, not for a single second. He looked at me and I knew, and I still laughed, and I will feel that for a long time. Be as good as Tariq, I told her. Going forward, that's enough. She laughed, a wet, relieved sound, and we talked for another hour about everything except Lauren, which was a relief for both of us. Olivia and Tariq came to Sean's school winter concert in December. They sat with Will and me and cheered embarrassingly loudly when Sean, playing the recorder, hit a note that was only approximately correct. It was one of the best evenings I'd had in years. Some things, in the dissolving, make room for better things. Lauren did not reach out to me. Not in November, not in December, not for a long time. I heard about her life in pieces, through Olivia, through my father's occasional careful updates. The divorce from Brian proceeded. The house was to be sold. It was a joint asset, and neither party could afford to buy the other out. Lauren had retained a lawyer, but the documentation Brian's attorney had compiled made certain arguments difficult to sustain. She moved into an apartment in Somerville. She was still at Callaway Marketing, though I was told by Olivia carefully that things there had also become complicated following the situation with Mike Ramirez, who had apparently not handled the aftermath of his disclosure to Brian, particularly professionally. None of this was my doing. I want to be clear about that because clarity matters to me. In a way it apparently did not always matter to my family. I had not called Brian. I had not called Lauren's employer. I had not forwarded anything to anyone, filed anything, disclosed anything. I had sat in my house in Dorchester with my husband and my son, and I had waited. What I had done, the one thing I had actively done, was this. About a month after the birthday party, I had written a letter, a long letter, addressed to my father, telling him clearly and completely what I had observed over the years, what I had heard, what I had seen, what I knew. I did not editorialize. I did not perform emotions or use dramatic language. I simply documented, as carefully and factually as I could, what I knew to be true. I gave it to him in a plain envelope on a Sunday afternoon. He read it in his armchair while I sat across from him. He folded it carefully and put it in the inside pocket of his jacket. He said, "Thank you for trusting me with this." That was my weapon. A letter. Words on paper given to the one person in my family who I trusted to do something honest with them. The rest was Doyle. Will told me this in bed one night in January, speaking quietly in the dark the way you tell each other the things that don't fit in daylight. He'd run into Brian at a hardware store in Cambridge, completely coincidental. They'd stood in the aisle by the paint samples for 20 minutes and talked. Brian had said that he was doing okay, that the divorce was hard but that he was, underneath the hard, okay, that he was sleeping better than he had in years. He'd said that he was sorry about Sean's birthday. He'd said that he had sat on that couch that day, knowing everything he knew, having gotten that call from Ramirez, having spent 3 days deciding what to do, and watched Lauren drop that toy and watch the room laugh, and he'd thought, I am watching a person reveal exactly who they are in real time, and the people around them are telling me everything I need to know about whether any of this can be saved. He'd said that the moment Lauren dropped the toy was the moment he decided. Will told me this, and I lay in the dark for a while processing it. I think about that kid, Brian had said, Sean. I think about his face. Me too, I thought. Me too. I should tell you more about Sean because he is the reason any of this matters. Sean is 7 years old, going on 8. He has his father's hands and my mother's green eyes and his own magnificent brain, which is currently most interested in marine biology, Minecraft, and a graphic novel series about a detective squirrel that he has read so many times the spines are cracked. He does not know the full story of his birthday. He knows that his Aunt Lauren is going through a hard time and that we are giving her some space. He knows that Grandpa Doyle has a new apartment and that sometimes we go there for dinner, and Grandpa makes his famous terrible spaghetti that Sean inexplicably loves. He knows that some days Grandma Barbara is sad and that we are kind to her even when it's hard. He knows that he is loved. On Christmas morning, Sean opened a new remote control car, the same model as the one that had been broken, the one Will had driven 3 towns over for. And when he saw what it was, he looked at his father with an expression of pure joy and said, "Dad, you fixed it." Will said, "Yeah, buddy, I fixed it." And Will caught my eye over Sean's head, and I had to look away quickly because I was not going to cry on Christmas morning in front of my 7-year-old. He fixed it. Some things, it turns out, can be fixed. Lauren called me in February. I almost didn't answer. I stared at her name on the screen for a long time and I thought about everything. The birthday, the ring, the letter, the apartment in Somerville, all of it. And then I thought about Doyle sitting in his armchair reading my letter and putting it carefully in his jacket pocket, and I answered. "Kelly," she said. "Lauren." A long pause. Long enough that I thought maybe she'd changed her mind. Maybe this was an accidental call. Maybe she was going to hang up and we were both going to pretend. Then she said, "I don't know why I did it." I didn't say anything. I waited. "The toy," she said, "at the party. I've been trying to understand why I did that and I don't have a good answer. I think I was angry about things that had nothing to do with Sean and I took it out on." She stopped. "It was cruel. To a child, it was cruel." I said, "Yes, it was." Another silence. "I'm not calling to ask you to forgive me," Lauren said. "I know that's not something I can ask for right now. I'm calling because I think I've been doing this thing for a long time, to you specifically, for a long time. And I don't think I understood that it was a thing I was doing until Dad took his ring off and I realized what it cost." I sat with that. "I'm in therapy," she said. "I just wanted you to know that." "I'm glad," I said, and I meant it, not in a performative way, genuinely, because whatever Lauren had been operating out of, it had not been making her happy. It had never made her happy. Watching my unhappiness had never actually given her anything worth having. We talked for a little while. We didn't fix anything. You don't fix 33 years of family architecture in a single phone call. But we talked. And at the end of it, Lauren said, "Give Sean a hug from me," and I said I would, and I meant that too. Some things take a long time. Some things require everything to break before there's room to rebuild. I'm not sure what Lauren and I will be to each other going forward. I'm not sure what I will be to my mother, who is still, last I heard, convinced that I am the villain of this story. I'm not sure what the family will look like in a year, or 5 years, or when Sean is grown. But I know what it looks like right now. It looks like my father eating terrible spaghetti with his grandson in a small apartment in Newton, laughing about something only the two of them understand. It looks like Tarek cheering too loud at a school recorder concert. It looks like Will and me on the couch after Sean is asleep, sometimes not even talking, just sitting in the quiet of a home we built. It looks like me. Actually, fully, finally me. I am 36 years old. I live in Boston. I have a husband who drives 3 towns over for a birthday gift and cries a little on Christmas morning when our son calls it fixed. I have a son who reads about detective squirrels and will one day, I'm convinced, do something magnificent. And I have a father who took a ring off his finger on a gray November Sunday and said 4 words, and in doing so handed me back something I hadn't known had been taken, the certainty that I was worth defending. Not because I had done anything dramatic or shouted or gone scorched earth or performed my pain loudly enough for the room to validate it, but because I had existed, steadily, quietly, faithfully, and one person, the right person, had been paying attention all along. The people who underestimate you are banking on you continuing to underestimate yourself. The moment you stop, the moment you take out a legal pad and a pen and you start writing down what you know, the entire architecture of their advantage begins to shift. I am not a person who believes in revenge. I believe in truth. I believe in documentation. I believe in writing a careful letter to the right person and trusting them to know what to do with it. And I believe in waiting. Patience, it turns out, is not passivity. Patience is the sharpest weapon I own. If you made it to the end of this story, thank you. I mean that more than I know how to say. I told this story because I spent years feeling like I was the only one sitting at the wrong side of the table, and I know, that someone watching this right now knows exactly what that feels like. If that's you, you are not invisible. You are not background. You are the whole story. Please subscribe. Your support means everything, and it reminds me I'm not alone in this. And if this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Ring the bell so you never miss when I come back, because I will come back. There is more to tell, and I want you here for all of it. I'm Kelly.